In 2016, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau fined Wells Fargo $185 million for opening approximately 1.5 million deposit accounts and 565,000 credit card accounts that customers had not authorized. Employees had created these accounts to meet aggressive cross-selling targets. The accounts were real, the customers hadn't asked for them. The investigation that followed revealed something that the bank's leadership described as a failure of a few bad actors. The subsequent evidence revealed something different, a system that had made the account opening behavior the rational response to the incentive structure that employees were operating under. Wells Fargo had set aggressive cross-selling targets, the goal of selling each banking customer 8 products, based on the heuristic that customers with 8 products had a sufficient relationship with the bank to be profitable to retain. The targets were tracked. The targets determined compensation. The targets determined career advancement. The employees who met the targets were rewarded. The employees who didn't meet the targets faced consequences. The incentive structure produced the behavior. The behavior produced the fraudulent accounts. The fraudulent accounts produced a $185 million fine, the resignation of Wells Fargo's CEO, and the eventual discovery of approximately 3.5 million unauthorized accounts, a number that grew as the investigation expanded. The management failure at Wells Fargo was not the account opening. The management failure was designing an incentive structure and failing to predict what behavior that incentive structure would produce at scale. This is the most precise statement of the episode's argument. Incentive structure predicts outcome better than strategy does, not because people are venal or corrupt, but because people respond to what they are rewarded for, and when the reward structure points in a direction that diverges from the strategic intention, the behavior follows the reward, not the intention. Charlie Munger, Berkshire Hathaway's vice chairman, has made the incentive argument in the starkest possible terms. Never ever think about something else when you should be thinking about the power of incentives. The power of incentives is not that they corrupt people. Most of the Wells Fargo employees who opened unauthorized accounts were not trying to defraud their customers. They were trying to keep their jobs and earn their bonuses in a system that told them, clearly and quantitatively, what behavior would produce those outcomes. The incentive structure was honest about what it rewarded. The employees responded honestly to what the incentive structure rewarded. The gap between what Wells Fargo's strategy said it was trying to achieve, deep customer relationships, cross-selling as the financial expression of those relationships, and what its incentive structure actually rewarded, account openings, regardless of whether the customer relationship justified them, is the gap that the $185 million fine collapsed. Enron's incentive structure, examined in an earlier episode, produced a similar pattern. The compensation system at Enron rewarded deal volume, deal size, and the reported earnings those deals generated. The system did not reward the quality of the deals, the accuracy of the earnings reports, or the risk concentration that the deals were creating. The behavior the system rewarded, large deals reported at aggressive marks, was precisely the behavior the post-mortem identified as the failure. The incentive structure was not a failure of ethics, it was a failure of systems design. A reward structure was built that rewarded the visible proxy for the strategic objective, deal volume as a proxy for value creation, rather than the strategic objective itself, actual value creation. The proxy and the objective diverged. The behavior followed the proxy. Have you ever worked in an organization where what was being measured and rewarded was a good proxy for the strategic objective in normal conditions, and where a specific set of conditions caused the proxy to diverge from the objective in ways that produced outcomes nobody had intended? Leave a comment. General Electric's stack ranking system produced a version of this pattern that is less often examined in the incentive structure literature. The stack ranking system did not reward collaboration. It rewarded individual performance relative to peers. In a market where individual performance was easily separable from team performance, in a sales organization where individual transactions were attributable to specific people, the stack ranking produced the competitive energy it was designed to produce. In a market where individual performance was dependent on team performance, in a cloud computing division, Where the product being built required dozens of engineers to collaborate closely over months, the stack ranking produced the opposite of what the strategic objective required. Engineers who needed to work together to build a competitive cloud platform were instead competing to look better than each other in their manager's year-end ranking. Information that would help a teammate was information that would reduce the relative advantage of the person holding it. The strategic objective was a competitive cloud platform. The incentive structure rewarded individual performance relative to peers. The two were compatible in some divisions and incompatible in others. The divisions where they were incompatible produced the underperformance that the post-Nadella era reversed by changing the incentive structure. The same organization, the same strategy, the same people, but different outcomes in the divisions where the incentive structure aligned with the strategic requirement and in the divisions where it didn't. The incentive structure was the variable, the outcome tracked it. If the specific mechanism, the incentive structure as the strongest predictor of behavior and therefore the strongest predictor of outcome, is what makes this channel worth your time, the like is the direct signal. The employees who opened unauthorized accounts at Wells Fargo, the branch bankers and customer service representatives, who were the specific people who created the fraudulent accounts, were not the designers of the incentive system they were operating under. They were the people at the bottom of an organizational hierarchy who had been given specific numerical targets with specific consequences for meeting or not meeting them, and who were making individually rational decisions about how to respond to those targets. The executives who designed the incentive system and who were aware through internal reports and complaints that the system was producing account openings that customers hadn't requested, were not in the branches opening accounts. They were receiving the reports that showed the targets were being met and the cross-selling metrics were improving, which were the reports that the incentive system was designed to produce. The gap between what the executives saw, improving metrics, and what the customers experienced, unauthorized accounts, was a product of the incentive structure's design. It rewarded account openings and reported them as improving metrics, without any mechanism for distinguishing authorized from unauthorized openings, until the regulatory investigation created that mechanism. The $185 million fine was the external mechanism. The internal mechanism, the incentive structure, had been functioning exactly as designed, producing exactly the behavior the design predicted in a direction that diverged from the bank's stated strategic intention. The practical lesson from Wells Fargo and from every case in this episode is about the relationship between incentive design and strategic intention. The single most reliable predictor of what an organization will do is not its strategy document. It is its incentive structure, what the people in the organization are rewarded for, what they are penalized for, and what is measured and reported in ways that make rewards and penalties visible. When the incentive structure and the strategic intention are aligned, the organization does what the strategy says. When they diverge, the organization does what the incentive structure rewards, regardless of what the strategy says. The strategy document is aspirational. The incentive structure is operational. When they point in different directions, the operational wins. The practical thing. For any strategic intention, we will build deep customer relationships. We will develop world-class cloud infrastructure. We will deliver accurate financial reporting. Identify the specific metrics and rewards that are actually attached to the behaviors the strategy requires. If the metrics reward a proxy that diverges from the objective under some conditions, identify what those conditions are and whether they are currently present. If they are, the incentive structure is producing behavior that will diverge from the strategy before the divergence appears in outcomes. Wells Fargo's warning signs were present in internal complaint reports for years before the regulatory investigation. The incentive structure had been producing unauthorized accounts for years before 2016. The divergence between the proxy, account openings, and the objective, genuine customer relationships, was visible to anyone who looked at what the target was measuring rather than what the target was supposed to represent. The incentive structure predicted the outcome. The strategy predicted something different. The outcome followed the incentive structure. The next episode looks at the forecasts that are built on top of these misaligned incentive structures and strategy documents, and the specific assumptions buried in every confident projection that the evidence available at the time of the projection should have called into question. This content was developed with the support of artificial intelligence tools and underwent human review, editorial curation, and approval before publication. The analysis presented here is strictly educational and philosophical in nature, grounded in behavioral psychology and classical stoicism.